Hiya and welcome back to the channel and the final part of the Kingdom of Gwynedd. This has been a month of a series to get done because of the sheer amount there is about this kingdom and how long they actually existed for, but we are almost there. This video will be my longest yet, so buckle up, get a nice hot drink and we'll get going. We last left off when Gwynedd ap Cynan had killed Te-Haon ap Caradog after he wrongly seized the throne, and now the kingdom was back under control of the bloodline from Rhodri Mor and the Aberfra dynasty. Now this video is about the eventual decline and the final stages for the kingdom. Things do get a lot more violent, as usually what happens when people and cultures get taken over for another, but I will do my best to keep it as tame as possible. History is history, however, we can't change it, and I fully believe you should always take history head on, but nevertheless, let's go. The Aberfra dynasty suffered various dispositions by rivals in Deheubarth, Powys and England in the 10th and 11th centuries. Gwynedd ap Cynan, who grew up in exile in the Norse Gael settlement of Dublin, regained his inheritance following his victory at the Battle of Maenavcan in 1081 over his Mathaval rivals, then in control of Gwynedd. However, Gwyned's victory was short-lived as the Normans launched an invasion of Wales following the Saxon revolt in northern England, known as the Harrowing of the North. Shortly after the Battle of Maenavcan in 1081, Gwynedd was lured into a trap with the promise of an alliance, but seized by Hugh de Vranch, Earl of Chester, in an ambush near Cowan. Earl Hugh claimed that Perverulad, up the River Gwynedd, and encompassing the modern counties of Denbighshire, Flintshire and Wrexham as part of Chester, and viewed the restoration of the Aberfra family in Gwynedd as a threat to his own expansion into Wales. The lands west of the Gwynedd were intended for his cousin Robert of Rhuddlan, and their advance extended to the Llyn Peninsula by 1090. By 1094, almost the whole of Wales was occupied by Norman forces. However, although they erected many castles, Norman control in most regions of Wales was tenuous at best, motivated by local anger over the gratuitously cruel invaders, and led by the historic ruling houses. Welsh control over the greater part of Wales was restored by 1100. In an effort to further consolidate his own control over Gwynedd, Earl Hugh of Chester had Harvey le Breton elected as Bishop of Bangor in 1092 and consecrated by Thomas Sparrew, Archbishop of York. However, the Welsh parishioners remained hostile to Harvey's appointment, and the bishop was forced to carry a sword with him at all times and rely on a small platoon of Norman knights for his own protection. Additionally, Harvey routinely excommunicated parishioners who he perceived as challenging his spiritual and temporal authority. Gwynedd escaped imprisonment in Chester, however, and slew Robert of Rhuddlan in a beachside battle with the Ganwy on the 3rd of July 1093. Gwynedd recovered Gwynedd by 1095, and by 1098 Gwynedd had allied himself with Catugan ap Leven of the Mathaval House of Powys, their traditional dynastic rivalry put aside for the moment. Gwynedd and Catugan led the Welsh resistance to the Norman occupation in North and Mid Wales. However, by 1098, Earl Hugh of Chester and Hugh of Montgomery, 2nd Earl of Shrewsbury, had advanced their army to the Menai Strait, with Gwynedd and Catugan regrouping on defensible Anglesey, where they planned to make their retaliatory strikes from their island fortress. Gwynedd had hired a Norse fleet from a settlement in Ireland to patrol the Menai and prevent the Norman army from crossing. However, the Normans were able to pay off the fleet to instead ferry them across the Mon. Betrayed, Gwynedd and Catugan were forced to flee to Ireland in a skiff. After this, the Normans landed on Anglesey, and their furious victory celebrations which followed were exceptionally violent, with sexual assault and carnage committed by the Norman army left unchecked. The Earl of Shrewsbury had taken an elderly priest and mutilated him, and made the church of Llandifrydog a kennel for his own dogs. But during these celebrations, a Norse fleet led by Magnus Barefoot, King of Norway, appeared off the coast at Puffin Island, and in the battle that followed, known as the Battle of Anglesey Sound, Magnus had shot dead the Earl of Shrewsbury with an arrow to the eye. The Norse left as suddenly and as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving the Norman army weakened and demoralised, unaware of what had actually just happened. Following this, the Norman army retired back to England, leaving a single Welshman, Owain ap Edwin of Tegainol, in command of a token force to control the Nismon, which is now Anglesey, and Upper Gwynedd, and ultimately abandoning any colonisation plans there. Owain ap Edwin transferred his allegiance to Chester following the defeat of his ally Tehan ap Caradog in 1081, a move which earned him the epithet Owain Frador, or Owain the Traitor, among the Welsh. In the late 1098, Gruffydd and Cattegan had landed themselves back in Wales safely and had recovered Anglesey without much difficulty, with Harvey le Breton fleeing Bangor for their safety in England. Over the course of the next 3 years, Gruffydd was able to recover Upper Gwynedd to the Conwy, defeating Hugh, Earl of Chester. In 1101, after Earl Hugh's death, Gruffydd and Cattegan came to terms with England's new king, Henry I, who was consolidating his own authority and also eager to come to terms. In the negotiations which followed, Henry I recognised Gruffydd's ancestral claims of Anglesey, Lynn, Denoding and Sheckwith, following the lands of Upper Gwynedd to the Conwy, which were already firmly in Gruffydd's control. Cattegan regained Ceredigion and his share of the family inheritance and poise from the new Earl of Shrewsbury, Robert of Bellem. With the settlement finally being reached between Henry I and Gruffydd and the other Welsh lords, the dividing of Wales between Pura Walia, the lands which existed under Welsh control, and Machia Wali, Welsh lands under Norman control, came into existence. The author and historian John Davies notes that the border shifted on occasion, in one direction and in the other, but remained more or less stable for almost the next 200 years. After generations of incessant warfare, Gruffydd began the reconstruction of Gwynedd, intent on bringing stability to his country. According to Davies, Gruffydd sought to give his people the peace to plant their crops in the full confidence that they would be able to harvest them. Gruffydd consolidated royal authority in North Wales and offered sanctuary to displaced Welsh from the Perfedwlad, particularly from Ross, at the time harassed by Richard II Earl of Chester. Alarmed by Gruffydd's growing influence and authority in North Wales, and also under the pretext that Gruffydd had begun sheltering rebels from Ross against Chester, Henry I launched a campaign against Gwynedd and Powys in 1116, which included a vanguard commanded by King Alexander I of Scotland, while Owain ap Cattegan of Ceredigion sought refuge in Gwynedd's mountains. Maredudd ap Levin of Powys had made peace with the English king as the Norman armies advanced. There were no battles or skirmishes fought this time, however. Rather, Owain and Gruffydd entered into truce negotiations. Owain ap Cattegan actually regained royal favour relatively easily. However, Gruffydd was forced to render homage and fealty and to pay a heavy fine, though he had lost none of his land or prestige this time. This last invasion left a lasting impact on Gruffydd, who by 1116 was in his 60s and with failing eyesight. For the remainder of his life, while Gruffydd continued to rule in Gwynedd, his sons Carfassion, Owain and Fwawladr would lead Gwynedd's armies after 1120. Gruffydd's policy, which his sons would execute and later rulers of Gwynedd adopted, was to recover Gwynedd's primacy without blatantly antagonising the English crown or poking the king bare. In 1120, a minor border war between Farwell Habowain, Lord of the Camote in the Diffin Cwyd Cantref, and Harwell Abbeyfell, Lord of Rufoniog and Ross, brought Powys and Chester into conflict in the Perfedwlad. Powys had brought a force of 400 warriors to the aid of its ally, while Chester sent Norman knights from Rhuddlan to the aid of Diffin Cwyd. The bloody battle of Maesmyn Cymro, fought 1 mile northwest of Ruthin, ended with Farwell Habowain slain, but the defeat of Diffin Cwyd. However, it was also a Pyrrhic victory, As the battle left, Harwell Abbey fell mortally wounded, as he was the last of his line. When Harwell Abbey died 6 weeks later, he left Rhwyvoniog and Ross bereft. Powys, however, was not strong enough to garrison Rhwyvoniog and Ross, nor was Chester able to exert influence inland from its coastal holdings of Rhuddlan and Darnley. With Rhwyvoniog and Ross abandoned, Gruffydd had annexed the cantrefs. On the death of Jon ap Catugan, the Lord of Meirionydd, a fight had broken out among his kinsmen over who would succeed him. Meirionydd was then a vassal cantref of Powys, and the family there were a cadet of the Mafafrau House of Powys. Gruffydd had given permission to his sons, Carvachon and Owain, to try and spread and press the opportunity of the dynastic strife currently happening in Meirionydd. The brothers had raided Meirionydd, however it would not be until 1136 that the cantref were firmly within Gwyned's control, perhaps because of their support of Earl Hugh of Chester, Gwyned's rival. In 1124, Carvachon slew the 3 rulers of Dyffryn Clwyd, who were his maternal uncles, bringing the cantref firmly under Gwyned's vassalage that year, and in 1125 Carvachon slew the grandsons of Edwin ap Goronwy, leaving Teganal bereft of lordship. However, in 1132, while on campaign in the Comote of Neidoy near Vanishan, victorious Carvachon was defeated in battle and slain by an army from Powys. The defeat checked Gwyned's expansion for a time, much to the relief of the men of Powys. In 1136, a campaign against the Normans was launched from Gwynedd in revenge for the execution of Gwenllian fer Gruffydd ap Cynan, the wife of the King of the Deheubarth and also the daughter of Gruffydd. When word had reached Gwynedd of Gwenllian's death and the revolting Gwent, Gruffydd's son Owain and Fwawladr invaded Norman-controlled Ceredigion, taking Van Vihangel, Aberystwyth and Favadan. Liberating Favadan, one local chronicler hailed Owain and Fwawladr both as bold lions, virtuous, fearless and wise, who guard the churches and their indwellers, defenders of the poor who overcome their enemies, affording a safest retreat to all those who seek their protection. The brothers restored the Welsh monks of Favadan, who had been displaced by monks from Gloucester brought there by the Normans, who had controlled Ceredigion. By late September 1136, a vast Welsh host gathered in Ceredigion, which included the combined forces of Gwynedd, Deheubarth and Powys, and met the Norman army at the Battle of Vigmawa at Cardigan Castle. The battle turned into a rout, and then into a resounding defeat of the Normans. When their father Gruffydd died, in 1137, the brothers Owain and Fwawladr were on a second campaign in Ceredigion and had taken Stephen's castle as well as Humphrey's castle. Gruffydd ap Cynan had left a more stable realm than had ever existed in Gwynedd for more than 100 years. No foreign army was able to cross the Conwy into Upper Gwynedd. The stability of Gruffydd's long reign had allowed for Gwyned's Welsh to plan for the future without fear that home and harvest would go to the flames from invaders. Settlements had started to become more permanent as well, with buildings of stone replacing timber structures. Stone churches in particular were built across Gwynedd, with so many limewashed that Gwynedd had become bespangled with them, as is the firmament with stars. Gruffydd had built stone churches at his royal manors, and Gruffydd's example had led to the rebuilding of churches with stone in Penmon, Berderon and Fewin in the Norman fashion. Gruffydd also promoted the leadership of the bishop's jurisdiction of Bangor in Gwynedd, and funded the building of Bangor Cathedral during the tenancy of David the Scot, Bishop of Bangor, between 1120 and 1139. Gruffydd's remains were eventually interred into a tomb in Bangor Cathedral as well. Owain ap Gruffydd succeeded his father to the greater portion of Gwynedd in accordance with Welsh law, the Fyfreth Hywel and the laws of Hywel, and became known as Owain Gwynedd to differentiate him from another Owain ap Gruffydd, the Mafafrau ruler of Powys, who had also come to be known as Owain Veliog. Fwawladr, Gruffydd's youngest son, inherited Aberfraw on Nis Mon and the recently conquered Meirionydd and northern Ceredigion between the rivers Aeron and Dyfi. By 1141, Fwawleder and Madog ap Maredydd of Powys led a Welsh vanguard as an ally of the Earl of Chester in the Battle of Lincoln, and joined in the rout which made Stephen of England prisoner of Empress Matilda for a year. Owain, however, did not participate in the battle, keeping the majority of Gwyned's army at home. Owain and Fwawleder came to blows in 1143 when Fwawleder was implicated in the murder of King Anarad ap Gruffydd of the Haybeth, Owain's ally and future son-in-law, on the eve of Anarad's wedding to Owain's daughter. Owain followed a diplomatic policy of binding other Welsh rulers to Gwynedd through dynastic marriages, and Fwawleder's border dispute and murder of Anarad threatened Owain's efforts and credibility. As ruler of Gwynedd, Owain stripped Fwawleder of his lands, with Owain's son Hywel dispatched to Ceredigion, where he burned Fwawleder's castle at Aberystwyth. Fwawleder fled to Ireland and hired a Norse fleet from Dublin, bringing the fleet to Abermynai to compel Owain to reinstate him. This same fleet of ships would be considered a sizable one to be able to face the fleet of Stephen, King of England, as well as the Irish and Scottish at Abernai Point prior in 1142. Taking advantage of the brotherly strife and perhaps with the tacit understanding of Fwawleder, the Marcher lords mounted incursions into Wales. Realising the wider ramifications of the war before him, Owain and Fwawleder came to terms and reconciled, with Fwawleder getting his lands back. Peace between the brothers held until 1147, when an unrecorded event occurred which led Owain's sons Hywel and Kynan to drive Fwawleder out of Meirionydd and Ceredigion, with Fwawleder retreating to Mon. Again an accord was reached, with Fwawleder retaining Aberfraw until a more serious breach occurred in 1153, when he was forced into exile in England, where his wife was the sister of Gilbert de Clare, 1st Earl of Hertford, and niece of Ranulph de Gernon, the 4th Earl of Chester. In 1146, news had reached Owain that his favoured eldest son and heir, Ron ab Owain Gwynedd, died. Owain was overcome with grief, falling into a deep depression from which none could console him, until news had finally reached him that Mold Castle and Teganal had fallen to Gwynedd, reminding Owain that he had still a country to live for. Between 1148 and 1151, Owain I of Gwynedd fought against Madog ap Maredydd of Powys, Owain's son-in-law, and against the Earl of Chester for control of Yale, with Owain having secured Rhuddlan Castle and all of Teganal from Chester. By 1154, Owain had brought his men within sight of the red towers of the great city of Dee. Having spent 3 years consolidating his authority in the vast Angevin Empire, Henry II of England resolved on a strategy against Owain I of Gwynedd by 1157. By now, Owain's enemies had joined Henry II's camp, enemies such as his wayward brother Fwawleder, and in particular the sort of Madog of Powys. Henry II raised his feudal host and marched into Wales from Chester. Owain positioned himself and his army at Basingwark, barring the road to Rhuddlan, setting up a trap in which Henry II would send his army along the direct road on the coast, while he crossed through the woods to outflank Owain. The King of Gwynedd anticipated this and dispatched his sons, David ap Owain Gwynedd and Kynan, into the woods, with an army, catching Henry II unaware. In the melee which followed, Henry II might have been slain, had it not been Roger de Clare, 2nd Earl of Hertford, who rescued the king. Henry II had retreated and made his way back to his main army, by now slowly advancing towards Rhuddlan. Not wishing to engage the Norman army directly, Owain repositioned himself first at Safe Asaph, then further west, clearing the road for Henry II to enter into Rhuddlan ingloriously. Once in Rhuddlan, Henry II received word that his naval expedition had failed, because instead of meeting Henry II at Deganwy or Rhuddlan, they had decided to go plunder Anglesey instead. This resulted in the Battle of Elo and has since been commemorated with a plaque 850 years after the Battle of 1157 during 2007. In a later letter to the Byzantine Emperor, Henry was probably recalling these moments when he wrote, "A people called Welsh, so bold and ferocious that when unarmed, they do not fear to encounter an armed force, being ready to shed their blood in defence of their country, to sacrifice their lives for renown." The naval expedition was led by Henry II's maternal uncle, Empress Matilda's half-brother Henry Fitzroy, and when they landed on Mon, Henry Fitzroy had the churches of Van Bedagoch and Van Vermath Afarnevav torched. During the night, the men of Mon gathered together, and the next morning fought and defeated the Norman army, with Henry Fitzroy falling under a shower of lances. The defeat of his navy and his own military difficulties had convinced Henry II that he had gone as far as was practical that year in his effort to subject Owain, and the king had offered terms. Owain I of Gwynedd, ever prudent and sagacious, recognised that he needed time to further consolidate power and agreed to the terms. Owain was to render homage and fealty to the king and resign to Gainal and Rhuddlan to Chester, and to restore Frauladr to his possessions in Gwynedd. The death of Madoc ap Maradiv of Poys in 1160 opened an opportunity for Owain I of Gwynedd to further press Gwynedd's influence at the expense of Poys. However, Owain continued to further Gwynedd's expansion without rousing the English crown, maintaining his prudent policy of not moving settled things. It was a policy of outward conciliation, while masking his own consolidation of authority. To further demonstrate his goodwill, in 1160, Owain handed over to the English crown the fugitive Enyonllyf. By 1162, Owain was in possession of Vivaliog and its castle, Tafhawen, and ravaged Aristli, slaying its lord, Hywel Abiaf. Owain's strategy was in sharp contrast to Rhys ap Gruffydd, king of Deheubarth, who in 1162 rose an open revolt against the Normans in South Wales, drawing Henry II back to England from the continent. In 1163, Henry II quarrelled with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, causing growing divisions between the king's supporters and the Archbishop's supporters. With discontent mounting in England, Owain of Gwynedd joined with Rhys ap Gruffydd of Deheubarth in a second grand Welsh revolt against Henry II, England's king, who only the year prior had pardoned Rhys ap Gruffydd in his 1162 revolt, assembled a vast host against the allied Welsh, with troops drawn from all over the Angevin Empire, assembling in Shrewsbury, and with the Norse of Dublin paid to harass the Welsh coast. While his army gathered on the Welsh frontier, Henry II left the continent to negotiate a truce with France and Flanders to not disturb his peace while campaigning in Wales. However, when Henry II returned to England, he found that the war had already begun, with Owain's son Dafydd raiding Angevin positions into Gainal, exposing the castles of Rhuddlan and Basingstoke to serious dangers. Henry II rushed to North Wales for a few days to build up defences there, before returning to his main army now gathering in Aristri. The vast host gathered before the allied Welsh principalities represented the largest army yet assembled for their conquest, a circumstance which further drew the Welsh allies into a close confederacy. With Owain I of Gwynedd the overall battle commander, and with his brother Frauladr as his second, Owain assembled the Welsh host at Corwen in the Vale of Adirion, where he could best resist Henry II's advance. The Angevin army advanced through Aristri into Wales, crossing the mountains towards Muir Castell, and found itself in the thick forest of the Viriog valley, where they were forced into a narrow thin line. Owain I had positioned a band of skirmishers in the thick woods overlooking the pass, which harassed the exposed army from a secure position. Henry II ordered the clearing of the woods on either side to widen the passage through the valley, and to lessen the exposure of his army. The road his army travelled later became known as the Fordier Seision, the English road, and through heaths and bogs through the Dee. In a dry summer, the moors may have been passable, but we have written record that on this occasion, the skies put on their most wintry aspect, and the rain fell in torrents, flooding the mountain meadows, until the great Angevin encampment became a thick marsh in the face of a hurricane-like force of wind and rain, diminishing provisions, and exposed supply lines stretching through hostile country subject to enemy raids, and with a demoralised army, Henry II was forced into a complete retreat, without even a semblance of a victory. In frustration, Henry II had 22 Welsh hostages mutilated, the sons of Owain's supporters and allies, and also 2 of Owain's own sons as well. In addition to his failed campaign in Wales, Henry's mercenary Norse navy, which he had hired to harass the Welsh host, turned out to be too few for use and were disbanded without engagement. Henry II's Welsh campaign was a complete failure, with the king abandoning all plans for the conquest of Wales, returning to his court in Anjou and not returning to England for another 4 years. While it is true that Henry II did not cross swords with Owain I, the elements had done their work for the Welsh. The stars in their courses had fought against the pride of England and humbled it to the very dust, to conquer a land which was defended not merely by the arms of its valiant and audacious sons, but also by tangled woods and impassable bogs, by piercing winds and pitiless storms of rain, seemed a hopeless task, and Henry resolved to no longer attempt it. It was easier for him to just stay away from the Welsh. Owain had expanded his international diplomatic offensive against Henry II by sending an embassy to Louis VII of France in 1168, led by Arthur Abarzi, Bishop of Bangor, who was charged with negotiating a joint alliance against Henry II. With Henry II distracted by his widening quarrel with Thomas Becket, Owain's army recovered to Gaynor for Gwynedd by 1169. In his later reign, Owain I was styled Princeps Wallensium, Latin for the Prince of the Welsh, a title with substance given his leadership of the Welsh in victory against the English king. Additionally, Owain commissioned the life of Gwynedd ap Cynan, the biography of his father, in which Owain firmly asserted his primacy over other Welsh rulers by absolute right through descent from Rhodri the Great, claiming that Owain I was the eldest male descendant of Rhodri the Great through paternal descent. The adoption of the title prince rather than king did not mean that he had lowered himself in status. The use of the title prince was a recognition of the ruler of Gwynedd in relation to the wider international feudal world. The princes of Gwynedd exercised greater status and prestige than the earls, counts and dukes of the Angevin Empire, suggesting a similar status to that of the King of Scots, himself nominally a vassal of the King of England. As Welsh society became further influenced by feudal Europe, the princes of Gwynedd would in turn use feudalism to strengthen their own authority over lesser Welsh lords, a two-edged sword for the King of England. Though Gwyned's princes recognised the jure suzerainty of the King of England, there remained well-established Welsh law separate from English law and were independent. Welsh manuscripts state the events which unfolded during the end of the 12th century. This story of the royal court of Gwynedd suffering uprising stems from the northern invasion of Wales a century prior to the civil strife of Owain Gwynedd and his immediate family. The internal wranglings for the crown of Gwynedd began with 2 sons, Rhun ap Owain Gwynedd and Hywel ap Owain Gwynedd, who were illegitimate, but Owain's Irish wife Feifrog. Owain and his father Gwynedd ap Cynan both had a Norse-Irish connection in their immediate family, and would have used this allegiance to their advantage, especially Gwynedd, who had hired army fleets of ships to invade North Wales himself. In 1146, Hywel and Cadel ap Gwynedd of Deheubarth had combined their forces to battle against invading Normans who had built castles in West Wales. They had taken Carmarthen, Lytherfaston and Whiston castles. Hywel ap Owain Gwynedd duly succeeded his father for a short-lived term during 1170. Due to the Norman invasion of Wales, the realm was in a civil war. The Princess Dowager and the wife of Owain Gwynedd, Christine Vex Gonorrhea, who had promoted her own son Dafydd ap Owain Gwynedd, who was later known as Dafydd I, was promoted as Prince of Gwynedd ahead of Hywel and any other senior son of Owain Gwynedd. Dafydd I made his move, and within a few months of his succession, Hywel was overthrown and killed in the Battle of Pentreth in 1171. Due to splinter factions, the kingdom's royal family began to move away from Gwynedd. It is Maelgwn ap Owain Gwynedd, who died in the 1174 strife, who appeared to have gained Anglesey. while the sons of Cynan held the countess of Merioneth, Ephioneth, and Radwi between them. David I was a Welsh royal stock, although his parents' union wasn't recognised by the church, and he was deemed illegitimate, as his parents, Owain and Kristen, were first cousins. He would still marry royalty later on. As a prince, he made the most of his position as the son of Owain and Gwynedd. It was David I who had waged a war on his brothers when he won the crown at the Battle of Penrith. David I, King of Gwynedd, was his title, and his merciless rule continued when he used his powers to harass his brothers into leaving Gwynedd. At one stage, in 1173, David imprisoned all of his siblings except for Madog and Melgwyn. It was Madog ap Owain Gwynedd who, after his father's death, is claimed to have set sail across the Atlantic Ocean and had discovered America. After 3 years of Melgwyn possessing Anglesey, he jailed him as well. Eventually David I was himself imprisoned by the future Prince of Wales, Llewyn the Great. That was after losing the Battle of Aberconwy against an alliance by Rhodri ap Owain and the sons of Cynan ap Owain Gwynedd. In the following year, he expelled all his remaining family rivals and made himself master of all of Gwynedd. In 1175, David I imprisoned his brother Rhodri during a revolt in 1173. David I adhered to Henry II as an ally. It was agreed that David would marry Emma of Anjou, who was Henry's half-sister, and would receive the manor of Ellesmere as their dowry. All this was done at the Brutitia Sogdion explained. All this was done, as the Brutitia Sogdion had explained, because David thought he could hold his territory in peace, but it proved insufficient. Before the end of 1175, Rhodri had escaped from captivity and had gathered sufficient support to drive David I from the royal household of Aberfraw. There appears to be no activity from David I for almost 20 years after 1175, until the final battle at Aberconwy in 1197. David I may not have inherited the leadership abilities of his father, but he had sufficient diplomatic qualities to make sure he could live at peace with his neighbours. This appears to be the one quality recognised by his contemporaries, as he was described by Giraldus Cambrensis as a man who showed good faith and credit by observing a strict neutrality between the Welsh and the English. His brother Rhodri had a more eventful time and fell out with the descendants of Cynan. They acted against Rhodri in 1190 and drove him out of Gwynedd altogether. Rhodri fled to the safety of the Isle of Man, only to be briefly reinstated in 1193 with the assistance of Runvar Grivarastion, the King of the Isles, and then driven out once more at the beginning of 1194, showing the humiliation of his brother David ap Owain. David I had a nemesis in his nephew, Llewellyn ap Loreth, who was most likely born in the year 1173, and therefore only a child when all these events played out. Llewellyn's father, Loreth de Wyndham, had been involved in the early stages of the dynastic struggles and most likely died sometime around 1174, during the same time as the usurpation of David I. As the century drew to a close, Llewellyn had become a young man and decided to stake his claim to power in Gwynedd. He conspired with his cousins Griffith and Merodydd and his uncle Rhodri, and in the year 1194 they all united against David I. Llewellyn fought battles throughout Wales, giving him the moniker the Great, like his ancestor Owain Gwynedd had attained. Having made alliances in his birth country of Powys, in the county of the origins of his family Gwynedd, in North Wales the stage was set for Llewellyn to dominate in battle and make alliances with the Crown of England, similar to his predecessor David I. Llewellyn ap Loreth, later known as Llewellyn the Great or Llewellyn I, was sole ruler of Gwynedd by 1200 and made a treaty with King John of England the same year. Llewellyn's relations with John remained good for the next 10 years. He had married John's illegitimate daughter Joan, also known as Joanna, in 1205. And when John arrested Gwynedd ap Owain of Powys in 1208, Llewellyn took the opportunity to annex southern Powys Ceredigion, and also he built Aberystwyth Castle. In 1210, relations deteriorated and John invaded Gwynedd in 1211. Llewellyn was forced to seek terms and to give up all his lands east of the River Conwy, but was able to recover these lands later the following year in alliance with the other Welsh princes. He later allied himself with the barons who had forced John to sign the Magna Carta in 1215. By 1216, he was the dominant power in Wales, holding the council at Aberdyfi that year to apportion lands to the other princes. Llewellyn concluded the Treaty of Worcester with the next King of England, Henry III, in 1218. The treaty formally recognised Llewellyn I as Prince of Wales. During 1220 to 1230, Llewellyn bolstered his claim to the kingship of Gwynedd by reinforcing his borders with castles being built around the Kingdom of Gwynedd, Criccieth, Digonwy, Dolbadarn, Dolwyfalan, and Castell y Bere. The Peace of Middle Treaty in 1234 marked the beginning of the end for his military exploits and virtually established peace for the rest of Llewellyn's life. Having been on terms with his neighbouring compatriots, Llewellyn had taken to his wife's lifestyle of fashioning a court similar to that of the English crown, and also the same rules of court devised in 914 at Aberfraw. The prince convened a court with household members and 12 royal mounted guards. The royal palace consisted of 35 positions similar to royal households the United Kingdom used today in England. Llewellyn followed the laws of Hywelva and attempted a succession process. Using the Welsh Gavelkind custom of choosing an heir, Llewellyn promoted his younger son, Dafydd II, and he customised the process of designating an heir to his own fruition by giving his eldest son Gruffydd lands to rule. Dafydd II was named heir with the support of King Henry III of England. During 1238, a Welsh royal council of princes was held at Strata Florida Abbey in honour of the heir of Gwynedd. Llewellyn in 1239 suffered a stroke and retired from active work in the Welsh government. He died only a year later in 1240. Prince Dafydd, the son of Llewellyn the Great, was installed as heir of Gwynedd by the Prince of Wales. While King Henry III of England had accepted Dafydd II and his royal claims to Gwynedd and Wales, Henry had invaded Gwynedd, and Dafydd II was forced to negotiate peace near St Asaph on the 29th of August 1241. Under the terms of the Treaty of Gwynedd, Dafydd II gave up all his lands outside Gwynedd. Dafydd was ruthless with his power. Like his predecessors, he imprisoned his own brother, once for 6 years, and again in Criccieth, and then in the Tower of London. It was the Bishop of Bangor who had negotiated letting Prince Gruffydd move to a better location in London. Gruffydd fell to his death in March 1244, while trying to escape from the Tower of London by climbing down the knotted sheet. With his main rival dead, Dafydd formed an alliance with other Welsh rulers and began a campaign against the English occupation of parts of Wales, all the while communicating with Pope Innocent IV in the Vatican City, Rome, about the powers bestowed on him by his predecessors as the ruler of Gwynedd. After savage fighting, the campaign was successful. However, Llewellyn's former seneschal, Sir Tudur ap Adnef Vahan, was captured by Henry III's forces in September 1245. Yet Tudur was released in 1247 after swearing fealty to the King of England. Dafydd II died a sudden but natural death on the 25th of February 1246. This brought a halt to the succession crisis which was fueling the wars. His widow, Isabella de Braos, returned to England, living in Haverford. She died 2 years later. Prince Llewellyn was living in Gwynedd at the time of his succession to the throne, and had fought alongside his uncle Dafydd II during the last campaign of his reign. This gave him an advantage over his elder brother Owain, who had been imprisoned in England with his father since 1242. Owain returned to Gwynedd from England immediately after the news of Dafydd II. Llewellyn and Owain were able to come to an agreement during an arranged peace accord by King Henry III of England, the Treaty of Woodstock, and they were to share a realm west of Conwy, but the treaty had only lasted 8 years. the younger brother of Llewellyn II was David, who had come of age by 14 and was invited by Henry III to pay homage in 1253. But in the spirit of his ancestors, he went to battle with his brother by forming an alliance with their other brother Owain, and fought at the Battle of Bryn Dewin, where they met with respective armies. Llewellyn II in victory imprisoned his brother Owain until 1277, and David for around a year's time. David eventually gained favour by 1277, working in conjunction with the Crown of England by gaining land on the northern border of England and Wales. David married Elizabeth Ferrers and had offspring. While Owain was given the title Lord of Clun, Llewellyn was seen as a figurehead for the new state of Wales, but had to coordinate with the newly formed Norman dynasty neighbouring to the east of Gwynedd. This was formalised with the Treaty of Montgomery later in 1267. With his brothers out of contention, Llewellyn II was sole ruler, and this allowed for over a decade of unbroken military success, aided by the weakness of the Crown of England and the support of his seneschal, Goron Wy ap Adef Nevev, who triumphed in battle by reuniting North Wales. Llewellyn II made an alliance with the Montfort family, marrying Eleanor de Montfort in 1275. Eleanor was the daughter of Simon de Montfort, 6th Earl of Leicester, who had been integral in the English Civil War by rebelling during the Second Barons' War. This time it was another pope, Clement IV, who had negotiated peace with the Welsh prince, insisting to disassociate from the Montforts after the Battle of Evesham. Llewellyn II and Montfort married twice, once in secret in 1275, and once again after the marriage was given consent by the new brother-in-law of Llewellyn II, Edward I, only after Eleanor herself was placed under house arrest for 3 years for passing through Bristol with her father's banner on board a ship. Their daughter, Gwenllian Llewellyn, was orphaned before her first birthday, and she was the last of her line. Succession would continue with a new King of England. Edward I would later acquire the title of the Prince of Wales. The Treaty of Aberconwy was signed in 1277 by Llewellyn II. It was a formal agreement to hand over the power of Gwynedd he had accumulated throughout Wales. The new House of Plantagenet was of French-Norman origins. However, Llewellyn's brother David still had different ideas. It was he who provoked incident by attacking Hawarden Castle on Palm Sunday in 1282. Later on, during November 1282, the Archbishop of Canterbury, John Peckham, had visited North Wales to mediate any potential conflict between sovereigns. Llewellyn II was offered a financial incentive and an English estate for his family, only if he was to surrender Gwynedd territory to Edward. Llewellyn II rejected the offer. The next month, on the 11th of December 1282, after not being recognised, Llewellyn was killed in an ambush, his head sent to London, and his body interred in Abercwmbir. After generations of civil strife in Gwynedd, it was David ap Griffith, the younger brother, who became David III, the grandson of Llewellyn the Great, who was next to gain the Prince of Wales title. From the offset, it was David who was immersed in royal life, representing the Welsh royal family. During 1253, David attended an event and paid homage to the English court with Queen Eleanor and Richard of Cornwall, as Henry III was in Gascony. That era, however, was the starting point of military campaigns against his brother Llewellyn from 1255. Llewellyn jailed him for a year after the Battle of Bryn Dewin. David in 1263 revolted against Llewellyn again, this time failing badly enough to need to flee England, and a year later was offered the lands of the English rebel baron Atelier after the Battle of Evesham during the Civil War. David had joined the English court life with Henry III and was in England until 1267. Again it was another pope, Adrian V, who had negotiated between the royal families of England and Wales. Peace had ensued in Wales for another 6 years, when David was counsellor to his brother, the Prince of Wales. Peace continued until another coup was formed involving Griffith ap Gwynedd, Prince of Powys, whose father had been arrested by King John, and it fell apart due to severe storms. David was forced to flee to England once more, this time pledging allegiance to King Edward I in 1274, and is decorated a knight and considered a friend. Years later, in 1277, David returns to haunt Wales accompanied by Edward I, and on the 16th of August an agreement of peace is made as to how to share the spoils of war. By the 10th of November, Llewellyn submits to the English crown at the Treaty of Aberconwy. The lands of Snowdonia, Anglesey and Penslyn were shared among the princes, and a dowry is given to David, along with an estate in Cheshire and a considered marriage to the daughter of a former adversary, the Earl of Derby. Later in his life, after returning to Wales, David changed his alliance once again and continues to fight against the English crown at risk of being a traitor. The Welsh courts had kept the support of Goronwy ap Halen, the seneschal of Gwynedd, who also supported his brother Llewellyn. Goronwy was the Lord of Ross. David III also had the support of Hywel ap Rhysgrig, the son of Rhysgrig, and his brother Rhys Wyndod, the disinherited princes of the Deheubarth. David had rekindled his ancestors' wish for Welsh independence. However, the involvement in rebellion had been against agreements put in place by the Treaty of Aberconwy. This provocation, on the 22nd of March, Palm Sunday in 1282, was an attack on Hawarden Castle and was the final conflict of the Kingdom of Gwynedd. David, like his brothers, had incurred the wrath of the English forces. The Norman army encircled Snowdonia and starved the Welsh people. David was soon moving desperately from one fort to another, as effective resistance was systematically crushed. Dolwyddalan Castle, which was at risk of becoming encircled and trapped, was the first castle to be abandoned on the 18th of January 1283. The next was Dolbardan Castle. This castle served as a base, but by March that year the noble site in the heartland of Snowdonia was also under threat by foreign forces, and David was forced to retreat once again. Finally, David moved his headquarters south of Castell near Llanfihangel Pennant. From this point forwards, the prince, royal family and remaining members of the Welsh government were all fugitives on the run, sleeping outdoors while being forced to keep moving from place to place to avoid capture. Castell starving garrison would eventually surrender on the 25th of April and then given to William de Valence, 1st Earl of Pembroke. After the fall of Ebere, David's movements were speculative, but he is recorded in May 1283, leading raids from the mountains, supported by his seneschal, Goronwy ap Halen, and the princes of the Deheubarth, Hywel ap Rhys and Rhys Wyndod. It is recorded that the last months saw inward disintegration. It has been recorded as the last month saw inward disintegration as well as submission to superior force. Nevertheless, Goronwy ap Halen had committed himself to the struggle and died in rebellion alongside the disinherited princes who stood with David ap Griffith in the last springtime of the Principality of Wales. Diehards who knew that theirs was not the heroism of a new beginning, but the ultimate stand of the very lost cohort, clutching the figment of the political order that they had once been privileged to know. On the 21st of June 1283, David was captured in the uplands above Abergwyn Riggin, close to Berrymore, in a secret hiding place recorded as Nan Hisglin. King Edward I decreed in ad correndum filium David protogenitum, and was caught by men of his own tongue. The last royal family of Wales were imprisoned, and David was executed by hanging in Shrewsbury for treason. His body was dismembered, and he suffered the same fate as his brother Llewellyn, with his head put on a pole for display at the Tower of London. The bard Blevenfard made his elegy. After the capture of the last true royal family of Gwynedd, the princes, including Llewellyn ap David, was imprisoned in Bristol Castle by the English crown, and the daughters become nuns in monasteries. Following the death of Llewellyn II in 1282, and then the execution of his brother David III the following year, 8 centuries of independent rule by the House of Gwynedd came to an end, and the kingdom which had long been one of the final holdouts to total English domination of Wales, was finally annexed to England. The remaining important members of the ruling house were all arrested and imprisoned for the remainder of their lives. Under the terms of the Statute of Rhuddlan in 1284, Wales was broken up and reorganised into 6 shires. The Snowdonia district in Gwynedd was made into 3 settlements, creating the counties of Anglesey, Carnarvonshire, Merionethshire, and the rest of Wales split beyond the Rivers Dee and Conwy, making Denbighshire and Flintshire in North Wales, and Cardigan and Carmarthen to the south of Wales. The Pura Walia was a new Defion for the Welsh marshland. Pura Walia was effectively the new counties which had been Gwynedd, and Marcha Walia was defined through divisions of land still being held by the Welsh people. The Pura Walia continued to be within the nominal Principality of Wales, ruled by the Council of Wales at Ludlow as part of the English crown. There were many Gwynedd-based rebellions after 1284 with varying degrees of success, with most being led by peripheral members of the old royal house. In particular, the rebellions of Prince Murdoch in 1294 of Owain Lagok, who was the great-nephew of Llewellyn ap Gruffudd between 1372 and 1378, who are the most notable. Because of this, the old royal house was purged and any surviving members also then went into hiding. A final rebellion in 1400 led by Owain Glyndwr, a member of the royal rival house of Powys, also drew considerable support from within Gwynedd. The title Prince of Wales was then recreated again after Llewellyn II. Prince Edward, later Edward II, was conferred in 1301 at Carnarvon Castle, beginning the Principality of Wales. The Welsh Marches would be merged with the Principality in 1534 under the Council of Wales and the Marches until all separate governance for Wales. The penal system was eventually abolished, and as an administrative entity, the Marches of Wales was abolished by the joint reigns of King William III of England and Mary II of England, who were monarchs of England and Scotland combined in 1689. And thus ends the tale of Gwynedd. It survived much longer than most royal houses and kingdoms within the Isles, surviving multiple invasions to various degrees. The Tudors were ancestors and namesakes to the former English royal house of Tudor. They were descended from the Welsh Marad ap Tudor, Ednir Vidvarhan being his most famous ancestor, who had married a daughter of the Haberth, and also another wife who was the shared mistress of Llewellyn the Great. His family were seneschals to the kings of Gwynedd. The Tudor dynasty became ancestors of the House of Stuart, and the Stuarts founded the European Jacobite family. They include direct descendants in the United Kingdom, Ireland, France, Germany, Italy and other countries on the continent of Europe and all around the world. But also the daughter of Llewellyn the Great, who we know as Elinfec Llewellyn, eventually married Donal William, the first Earl of Mar, after becoming a widow from her first marriage. Their daughter Isabella of Mar would then go on to marry Robert the Bruce, and their line would also eventually join the Tudors and the rest of the European royal families through the Scottish king line, eventually leading to James VI of Scotland and First of England, and then further down the line the creation of what we would later know as the United Kingdom of Britain. Although the dynasty and kingdom of Gwynedd are long gone, they're still ongoing through current generations, forever enduring. And that is the end of this saga. This was a really long and hard video to make and complete. I'm sorry it took so long between life and work commitments. I also had to take the time to sit and work out how to pronounce everything in this video. It isn't perfect, and I'm sure any Welsh speaker watching this video is probably going to be crying into their hands the longer they listen. I did struggle quite a bit with repeating pronunciations multiple times, and I know I definitely messed up and probably forgot how I said it literally 5 minutes ago. But I'm a simple Essex girl with no talent for languages, just a love for history. If you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video. Please don't forget to share, like and subscribe to the channel. Now that this mammoth of a video is out the way, we should be able to get back to normal viewing. I hope to see everyone back in the next one. Bye.